Few people have an opportunity to see a flying fox up close, and those that do are usually surprised by how attractive and engaging the animals are. For some people, a single encounter with the flying fox can lead to a lifelong passion for the animals and an abiding interest in the controversial issues that surround them and in their ecological role in Australian forests. Marjorie Beck and Janet Hutchinson channeled their concerns over flying fox conservation into an ongoing program of public education, which features the best possible tool, the animals themselves. For Janet and Marjorie, a chance encounter with the flying fox was a life-changing experience.
I remember years ago I started off my batting career. I just retired after many years of working, and I was in my late 50s. And I was walking through this local shopping centre thinking, what am I going to do with my life? You know, I've always worked, and I always worked with children and in the education side of things. And I met one of the foundation members of the Bat Society, Elizabeth, and she had a bat called Stephanie out with her. And I looked down into the cage, and Stephanie reached out to touch me, and I looked at Stephanie, and I was a goner. I was just an absolute goner. So 3 months later, I was a member of a committee, which I said I would never do in my life, and I have gone on the most amazing ride since then. I have learned so much. I've done things I never ever thought I could do in 1,000 years, and it's thanks to these bats that have given me the confidence to do it. So yes, I'm totally dedicated to what I'm doing. You want a grape now? Do you?
I'm Janet Hutchinson. I've been working with bats since 1988 when I met my first bat, baby bat this was, who was in care with a neighbour who found she just couldn't cope. So I became surrogate mum, except for the last few years when we've had to move and baby bats and any sort of bats are not allowed. I've reared at least one bat every year. So in that time I've had a hand in rearing, or actually reared, up to 70. It's very fulfilling, very exhausting. You're up at 2 in the morning to feed the babies. You tiptoe in the morning to see if they're still alive. And it's a great joy when the baby bat says, you know, you're mum. And they're the one animal in the wildlife group that you can have that rapport with, because most of them we have to keep at a distance to keep that humanising effect away.
Many years ago when the Kringai Bat Conservation Society began, Nancy was working at the museum, and in the museum they had a bat called Gollum. And Nancy was an education officer at the museum at the time, and the children were all coming in, and she thought, what are we going to do with the children today? And she looked at Gollum and thought, I know what I'll do. So she reached behind the door and took Gollum down from behind the door and took it out to the children, and the children just took one look at Gollum and fell in love, and Gollum took one look at the children. It was just instant love between the children and the bat. So from that we realised that probably a good idea would be to gather a group of flying foxes together, hand-reared non-releasable orphans, and keep them together. Down at that stage it was at Lane Cove National Park. And we could take these animals out to meet people, because it's the actual meeting the bat and seeing it close up that makes the difference. Hannah was one of those original bats. She's 22 years old, and she came into care and was part of the group in 1991 when the group first started. She's the only original member of the group left now. So we kept about 12 bats down at Lane Cove National Park, and we took them out to schools, to open events, to environmental group talks, to anyone that really wanted to stay still long enough to listen about bats. And in fact I can remember one night Nancy saying, oh, we're doing a talk down at Jamboree. So Nancy and I threw a couple of bats in the back of the car in the cage, and off we went down to Jamboree. Now I remember coming back at 2 o'clock in the morning wondering what in the heck I was doing batting as we were cruising along at 2 o'clock in the morning, and this is after an hour of bat talk at 8 o'clock. But they have made such a difference to people's negative perceptions of the animals. They're an absolutely delightful group of bats.
Another highlight was having an adult bat live with us for 9 years. Now, that is not approved. It wouldn't happen again, but things were different then, and it was not known that this bat, when he was reared as a baby, needed to be with other bats to learn bat manners, bat protocols. And he didn't meet another flying fox until he was 4, I think. Anyway, he became KBCS's first education wildlife bat, teaching bat. He was, his name was Gollum, known familiarly as Golly. Now, when Golly was 11, he'd been sort of around a long time, and he really wasn't getting on with other bats in groups. So they really didn't know what to do with him. So I looked hopeful, and Golly came to live with us. Now, he came as a member of the family. We arranged a back porch for him where we thought this would be most suitable for bats. For a wildlife bat, he'd have company, he'd have food, he'd be protected. He could still go out on his talks. Now, Golly didn't think this was a good idea, so he hung on the back screen door and shouted. He wanted to be inside with us. Okay. So my husband built for him, for his own protection and for the protection of our curtains and carpets, a large cage. It was rather like a tall telephone booth, wire. And during the night, he lived in that inside in our living room. During the day, he went out in it and was just part of the environment. He used to come out, and I didn't have to have him in a cage. If we went out, he would hang onto my hand like a handbag, and we would just go on. And he absolutely loved performing. And you'd see Gollum there, you'd talk about him, and you'd say, these are his wings, look, aren't they beautiful? And he'd go like this, and he'd just show off. He loved it. Sadly, he became ill when he was nearly 20, and ultimately had to be put down, which was a terrible hole in our life.
Then a couple of years ago, the numbers of bats in the group started dwindling, and we ended up with only 4 bats left. And because of the circumstances, we couldn't actually add more bats to the group. And so we didn't know what to do with them. And then somebody informed us of the Australian Wildlife Walkabout Park, and we came out and sussed them out, very, very carefully, because I wasn't going to put my babies anywhere that wasn't right. And the end result of this was that they built this wonderful structure behind me for the bats, and we brought them up here, and new bats were added to it. So these were the foundation members of a new group of education animals. There are only 2 of them left now, Hannah here and Molly, who you've just seen with the baby. Now Molly's 17 years old. 17 years old now, yes. So they're carrying on their education work, which is absolutely wonderful.
One of the real thrills was about 3 years ago, after I'd had to give up bats because of house rules, to hear that a little bat I had reared in 1993 had been found dead on the power lines. That was very sad, but that was many years later. She'd had a full life. But aboard was a baby bat, and she was going to continue. So I felt, well, you know, something I had done, something I had enjoyed doing, it had worked, and there was a new generation perhaps to carry on.
All the bats are very, very different. Hannah here just loves to pee in my face when she greets me. She pees in Jude's ear, and she pees in Minna's face as well, I believe, but not a good thing. But what she's doing here is she's licking me because she's salty. She's licking the salt off my arm. It's a hot day. The tongue's quite rough, actually. It's like a cat's tongue, quite rough, and it holds the pollen and the nectar in place when they're licking the nectar and pollen.
Does she recognise you?
Yes, they all recognise you, and they all behave very differently. Depends on who has them out as to how they'll behave. And some of them are very naughty because they misbehave with certain people. And we all have our favourite bats to take out.
Oh yes, do they have personalities? I won't, Marjorie had one of our little bats, hello sweetheart, who who was very fond of her and used to sneak up behind her. And her favourite trick was to wee all over Marjorie from behind and then run off, obviously giggling. That was wonderful.
I remember these are the silly things we do with bats. I remember one year we had fires raging around Sydney, and I was called up to get the bats out of Lane Cove National Park.
Yeah.
We had 10 of them. And of course it's very difficult to keep 10 bats anywhere, and I couldn't keep them for 4 days in small cages. So what I did is I made up as many cages as I could, and because I had grandchildren visiting me, I couldn't have them anywhere where there were children going to poke their fingers in it. So what I used to do is take the bats, and I had a very special spot on the back veranda. And if ever I had to go out or at night time, I had to bring the bats back in again because I didn't want the birds attacking them. So the only place to go was into my bedroom. So I told my husband very sweetly and very kindly that he was no longer allowed to sleep in his bedroom. He'd have to go and sleep on the lounge room floor. He was very, very obliging about it. Then at night time, so that they get a bit of flying practice, I'd open the cages, and those that could fly were allowed to fly around the bedroom. But of course there was nowhere to land, so I used to stand on the middle of the bed with my arms out like this and wait for the bats to come circling around to land on me. It's sheer lunacy, I tell you. But
And even now, when I can't rear baby bats, I'm able to mentor. Sometimes new carers who come in, I'm not quite sure, or just maybe need an afternoon's babysitting. And I look after them for the afternoon. I get what I call my bat fix, which is a great, great help. And even the smell of them. And coming out here to see them, there are only 2 left that I knew when they were young. It's magic. They're really magic people. And I say people advisedly, because they have a sense of humour. They have their cranky moments. They have their happy moments, and they're just great people to be with. What else can I say?
You probably don't know and probably don't care. Just because you don't see them don't mean they're not there. The flying fox, the BAT, the greatest threat that they're facing is ignorance of you and me. You probably don't know and probably don't care. Just because you don't see them don't mean they're not there. The flying fox, the BAT, the greatest threat that they're facing is ignorance of you and me. Bat societies are helping them in Gordon. Much respect, I must thank and applaud them. Bats are on the endangered list, and if we don't act now, mate, they won't exist. We gotta fight the issues that they're facing if bats are gonna last till the next generation.